Welcome, everyone. We're together here in a confluence of legacies. As we gather in this place on this land, this storied and ancestral land of Cree and Métis peoples, those who have made their home here for generations. And we gather acknowledging with respect the culture and traditions and spirituality of our Indigenous brothers and sisters, whose story is really woven into this land. And we also honor how this land has provided for our ancestors and has opened to provide safety and opportunity to newcomers who find refuge here from all over the world. All of us together are partners in the responsibilities that we have undertaken as members of Treaty 6. And we gather acknowledging that we accept responsibility to transcend the wounds of our past and to seek healing and reconciliation together. Welcome to SSUC. Welcome to Southminster Steinhauer United Church, where we are spiritual seekers united in community. And whether you're here in this room in Edmonton or you're joining us online from where you find yourself this morning, we welcome you. You are each essential to the spiritual community we build together as we gather with one another. You are welcome whatever your age, your gender identity, sexual orientation, your race, your ethnicity, your language, your religion or none. Whatever your search, this is a safe place for our laughter and our tears, our questions and our fears, our wonder and our amazement, our joy and serenity. Together we seek to open to all that this time holds for us as we continue to explore a series we began many weeks ago, a series exploring ABCs for deeper living. And today we explore what it is to be those who know how to observe. As we come together with one another today, we have just a few words of greeting and announcement that we want to make you aware of. We want to invite all of you to join us for a few moments following our gathering this morning.
Thanks, Nancy. Good morning. The First Nations Child and Family Caring Society was developed in 1998 by First Nations Child and Family Services agencies to provide research, policy, professional development, and networking to support those caring for First Nations children, youth, and families. Today, using a reconciliation framework that addresses contemporary hardships for Indigenous families in ways that uplift all Canadians, the Caring Society champions culturally based equity for First Nations children and their families so that those children can grow up safely at home, be healthy, achieve their dreams, celebrate their language and culture, and be proud of who they are. Have a Heart Day is an annual opportunity to remind us and our government of the goals of the Caring Society. I found a video made 5 years ago by the Caring Society to describe what they do, and we'll look at it now. For us to remind the government of these goals, ending the gaps. It's also an opportunity for all of us to assess how well all of the gaps are being met for Indigenous people. From my perspective, things are not going as well as they could be. For example, on January 26, 2016, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal found the Canadian government guilty of discrimination against 163,000 First Nations children due to the inequitable funding of child welfare services on reserves. The original complaint was filed in 2007, 9 years before that. To this date, our government has spent millions of dollars fighting this ruling of discrimination, instead of working out measures to carry out their responsibilities. In another example,
this is a new day none of us has ever seen before and will never see again. As we honor the light of this new day, we place a flame in our midst as a symbol of our intention to live in ways that seek the light of our common good, caring for the most vulnerable members of our societies, reflecting the light of love in the words we speak, in the thoughts we hold, in the actions we enact, and to honor the light in one another.
Deep in the darkest winter night, here with my candle burning, cozy and warm inside the light, now that the year is turning. What does the future hold in store? Where has our journey brought us? How can we learn from what's gone before? What has experience taught us? Art of creation, lover of shadow and light, sing us the songs of our billion stars, silently all through the night. Friendship will light the darkest hours, true love will hold the vision. Peace and goodwill on earth is ours. Let it be our decision. Art of creation, lover of shadow and light, sing us the songs of our billion stars, silently all through the night. Deep in the darkest winter night, here with my candle burning, cozy and warm inside the light, now that the year is turning. Feel how the year is turning.
You all have eyes that see? Do you? Yes. Okay. Well, when you see things, you use your eyes. I'm not telling you anything new. You know that. Use your eyes. Did you know we use other things when we see, too? We don't just use our eyes. We see things with our eyes, but we also have to make sense. We have to understand what we're seeing. If you've never seen something before, how would you know what it is? You wouldn't. So we have to use our brains. We sometimes use our imaginations when we see things to think, what is that? Or sometimes we use our experience. If we've seen it before, then we know what we're seeing. So to be good friends, we need to remember that we all see things differently because we've got different imaginations, we've got different experiences, we've seen different things. So we all see things differently, and that means that if we want to get along with other people in the world, we have to understand that all our eyes see things differently. And that's why I want to share with you a story called They All Saw a Cat by Brendan Wenzel. Okay, here we go. The cat walked through the world with its whiskers, ears, and paws. And the child saw a cat. There's the cat that the child saw. And the dog saw a cat. It's the same cat, but that's how the dog sees the cat. And the fox saw a cat. Chubby and slow, maybe, I don't know. The cat walked through the world with its whiskers, ears, and paws. And the fish saw a cat. Ooh, blurry and scary. Oh, and the mouse saw a cat. Ah, run! And the bee saw a cat. Oh, it's beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, I'd like to see like a bee for 5 minutes. The cat walked through the world with its whiskers, ears, and paws. And the bird saw a cat. Do you see it? Yeah. Way down there. Mm-hmm. And the flea saw a cat. The flea's on the cat. Oh my goodness. Yep. And the snake saw a cat. Whoa, it's pretty fancy. And the skunk saw a cat. And the worm saw a cat. Yeah. And the bat saw a cat. Yes, they all saw the cat. Yes, they all saw a cat. Oh my goodness, look, it's how everyone sees the cat. All in one. A child and a dog and a fox and a fish and a mouse and a bee and a bird and a flea and a snake and a skunk and a worm and a bat. That's fun to say. The cat knew them all, and they all knew the cat. And the cat walked through the world with its whiskers, ears, and paws. Then it came to the water.
Cats do not like water.
Well, look. And imagine what it saw in the water. The cat saw itself. Have you ever looked at yourself in water when it's moving? Oh, it's kind of a crazy version of yourself. Yes. Oh, that's the end of the story. So, thank you for sharing that with me. I want you to remember, we all see things differently. We have to remember that, and we can understand each other better. Would you like to go to your programs now? Preschool, Kid Spirit, Youth Cafe? You're welcome to all of them. Goodbye.
When we come to the second book of the Hebrew Scriptures, that is what we have referred to as our Older Testament, we discover stories of a character named Moses. And not far into his story comes this story of Moses in the midst of his most ordinary day. Moses was a shepherd tending to the flock of his father-in-law, Jethro, who was a priest in Midian. Moses led his flock beyond the wilderness, and he came to Horeb, that special place known as the Mountain of God. And there appeared to him a flame of fire out of a bush. And he looked, and the bush was blazing, but it wasn't being consumed by the fire. And Moses said, "I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush isn't burned up." And when he turned aside to see, a voice called to him out of the bush, speaking his name, "Moses, Moses." And he answered, "Here I am." And the voice said, "Don't come any closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." In this ancient and archetypal story, A reading from the American poet Mary Oliver, who died about a year ago now. A poem she wrote entitled, Yes, No. How necessary it is to have opinions. I think the spotted trout lilies are satisfied, standing a few inches above the earth. I think serenity is not something you just find in the world, like a plum tree holding up its white petals. The violets along the river are opening their blue faces like small, dark lanterns. The green mosses, being so many, are as good as brawny. How important it is to walk along, not in haste, but slowly, looking at everything and calling out, yes, no. The swan, for all his pomp, his robes of grass and petals, wants only to be allowed to live on the nameless pond. The catbrier is without fault. The water thrushes down among the sloppy rocks are going crazy with happiness. Imagination is better than a sharp instrument. To pay attention. This is our endless and proper work. In the words of this poet, When I read a poem, I'm often amazed by the poet's powers of observation. For instance, when we read a line like that one we just heard a moment ago, in the poem, Yes, No. The violets along the river are opening their blue faces like small, dark lanterns. And I know that I, too, have seen violets. I've seen that very ordinary flower. And I've seen it countless times without noticing that they're opening their little blue faces like small, dark lanterns. And when I stand before a work of art, I'm amazed by the artist's powers of observation. We sit here every week in the presence of this fabric art created by Dorothy Swanson. But don't ask me how many shades of blue dissolve into the purple, because I often see without observing. And life is forever trying to teach me the wisdom of the poet, that to pay attention is our endless and proper work. And there's so many teachers of attention. Poets and artists are some of the best instructors in the life work of observing. A word the dictionary defines as noticing or perceiving and registering it as being significant. That's what the dictionary says it means to observe. That biblical character we know as Moses emerges from the world of the ancient stories to mentor us in the life skill of learning how to observe. How to pay the kind of attention that makes artists and poets of all of us. So in the world of that ancient story, it took a task-oriented, middle-aged shepherd a long time to learn a new way of seeing. The story comes to us as an ordinary day in the life of an ordinary shepherd. He was moving his sheep to the backside of the mountain in the hopes of finding better grazing grounds. He wasn't out in the hot desert sun just for a stroll. He had a clear purpose and a distinct destination in mind. And out of the corner of his eye, he notices something. He observes something. He sees a bush with the eyes of a poet or an artist. He sees fire in the bush. He sees what appears to be a flame in the midst of a bush that flares with light, but doesn't act like fire, doesn't reduce the bush to ash. He continues to see a flame. He chooses to see an ordinary bush in a new and extraordinary way because he chooses to give this bush his undivided attention. How many times had he crossed this landscape? How many times had he walked this very way and never noticed the slant of light at this time of day? Never noticed the play of sun on the leaves? How many times had he crossed this desert with his attention consumed by guilt or worry, preoccupied with grief or loneliness, or just plain focused on the task at hand? But on this unrepeatable day, he sees with his eyes and more than his eyes. What speaks to me in this story is his surrender to his senses, his willingness to let go of the task he was doing to let go of the preoccupations of his mind and give his attention to the wonder and the beauty and the mystery that had presented itself to him in the midst of the mundane of his day, his everyday. Maybe he'd been well mentored by those sheep in whose company he had spent many a desert day and night. Maybe he's following their lead for a change, leaning into his curiosity, choosing to lead the ordered and purposeful path of his day, to turn aside and see. Turning aside, the newly chosen ground becomes holy ground. Turning aside, the chosen ground becomes holy ground when he begins to pay attention, to listen for what speaks his name, to see with his eyes and more than his eyes, to know the truth the poet expressed, that imagination is better than a sharp instrument. And when he chooses to give his attention to the bush, he allows himself to be altered by the experience of this place where he finds himself. And observing and being present to the moment, he's forever changed. And for some reason, his capacity to observe is improved with bare feet. He sees better when he takes his shoes off. I know some of us hear better when we put our glasses on to answer the telephone. But he hears better when he takes off his shoes. It slows him down, it sharpens his senses, it keeps him from moving too quickly, and when he removes his shoes, he allows himself to be addressed by this moment. Last year in Germany, I had the experience of a teacher whose name was Meshi Chavez. He is a student of indigenous ways who makes his home in Portland. He's a professional dancer. And he told us that his elders had taught him, shoes make us stupid. We experience the world through our skin. And for him, in learning his traditional ways and in learning to dance, he needed his shoes to be off and his feet to be bare and his soles to be connecting with the soil beneath his feet, because shoes make us stupid. In the world of the metaphor, those shoes stand in for so much that we strap on ourselves to protect ourselves from life. Those shoes are anything we wrap ourselves in to insulate us from the vulnerability of our humanness, from the beauty and pain of the world of our lives. The vulnerability of what it is to live in these fragile bodies of flesh and blood. These bodies that grow and change, that do amazing things, that age and ache, that heal and hurt, that mend and decay. And when we're done with them, and when they're done with us, they humbly turn themselves into dust. And something happens when we feel those sharp stones beneath our feet and that cool sand between our toes. Something opens to us when we expose ourselves to the holiness that's everywhere, right under our noses and right under our feet, within us and around us. But we have to peel off our protective layers to really get it. We have to open our eyes and unstop our ears and uncover our feet, and we have to unshield our hearts. We have to be willing to turn aside and see. to give our full attention to that which is both plainly and mysteriously right before us. And before we can do any of that, we have to surrender to our curiosity. Maybe that's why the closer we are to having just taken on skin, the newer our skin, the better we are at walking barefoot, the better our acquaintance with curiosity. You know, if you've walked with a toddler, you've had that kind of experience. You've learned that walking is all about being immersed in time and place. It isn't about arriving at any destination. It's mostly about turning aside and finding the treasures in the dandelions and the insects and in the most ordinary stones under our feet. And if you've walked with a poet, you have exactly the same experience, because you'll stop for every flower and tree and insect, whatever presents itself, because there will be burning bushes all along the way. And Moses discovered that holy ground isn't necessarily high ground. It isn't always a deeply spiritual place of pilgrimage or a place of great beauty. Holy ground is right under our feet, wherever they are. But we often miss it because we're strapped into our shoes of hurry and worry. Our shoes built for efficiency and destination. All those devices within us and without us, which we've designed to keep us from noticing the countless mysteries along the way of our everyday, to keep us from knowing that we're walking on holy ground. We're just not noticing it, because they're not willing to turn aside and observe. Because when we turn aside and pay attention, we'll find ourselves bowed down before the altars of the ordinary in the midst of the blessedly commonplace every day. Moses, walking with his flocks in Midian, trying to escape his sorry past. The prophet Isaiah, moping in the temple as his world is falling apart. Buddha, sitting under a bo tree, coming to terms with the suffering he's been protected from his whole life. Jesus, up to his knees in the muddy Jordan, waiting to be submerged by his radical cousin. Mother Teresa doing what she can for the poor in the streets of Calcutta. Each of them arises for us as a spiritual giant, mostly because they learned how to turn aside and pay attention. They learned how to be present to their lives and the needs of their world. They learned how to be fully present to what presented itself to them. They learned how to take off their shoes and ground their lives in the sacredness that's experienced but can never be adequately explained. We have prophets and poets and artists and toddlers to teach us how to observe. We live in a world where the winged and the four-legged and the tailed and the two-leggeds, there's mentors all around us. Because for those who will train their eyes to see, the whole world is like a mysterious fire that's hidden in a very drab bush. Blessed are those who will walk slowly and look closely. They'll walk on holy ground. And blessed are we when we discover that whatever our interests, or whatever our talents, whatever our training, whatever our careers, whatever our vocations, to pay attention That's our endless and proper work. To pray is one of the ways we pay attention. We pay attention to all that draws our gratitude, and we pay attention to the needs of the world. The stories that are handed down to us of Jesus of Nazareth tell us that his friends, those who had spent time with him and followed him, asked him to teach them to pray. Perhaps that is to be asked to teach us how to pay attention. Patterned after that prayer, we offer these words with one another. We open to the sacredness at the heart of all, called by many names. We open to the deep mystery we trust to be love. May we be faithful to the vision of building a beloved community on earth. May there be daily bread to nourish all hunger, forgiveness for the harm we have done, and the capacity to forgive those who have hurt us. May we not feel abandoned in hard times, but find the strength to meet each moment and the wisdom to walk in the light of deep gratitude. For the love is with us now and forever. Amen. We go together to scrape our shins on the altars of the world which are everywhere. Those sacred moments to which we've turned aside and given our attention. We go in the light of love that is within us, between us, around us, and beyond us, now and always.